The Secret of the Old Vicarage Shadowed Window, a Miss Marple mystery. Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery takes us to the Old Vicarage, where a single window glows with a flickering light, and a shadow moves behind the curtain. Slow, deliberate, and impossible to identify. Some say it's the vicar working late. Others whisper of an intruder. But when a sudden tragedy strikes, Miss Marple notices the small details everyone else misses. Dust disturbed, a window left open, and secrets someone desperately wants to hide. Because in the Old Vicarage, the shadow isn't the mystery, it's the warning. Before we uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries. Chapter 1: The Shadow That Should Not Exist. The wind carried a strange stillness over the village of Stone Meadow, the kind of calm that gently presses against the windows of old houses and whispers along the edges of gardens. On most evenings, residents welcomed that hush. They counted on it. They brewed tea, set lamps glowing in their sitting rooms, and trusted that their quiet world would remain undisturbed. But on this particular night, the village felt as though it were holding its breath. At the far end of High Street, framed by tall yew trees and a wall of cracked stone, stood the Old Vicarage. Tall windows, slate roof, thick timbers that had outlasted generations of vicars. Though the building no longer housed clergy, people still called it the Old Vicarage out of habit and perhaps because it was easier than giving it a new name. And in its upper right window, behind a sheet of rippled glass, something moved. Not the kind of movement that could be brushed aside. Not the sway of a curtain or the reflection of a passing cart. It was the shape of a human figure. Still. Watching. As if waiting for something, or someone. At that exact moment, Miss Marple happened to be walking home. She had finished a pleasant visit with her friend Mrs. Hargrave, whose conversation rarely touched upon anything troubling. But tonight, Miss Marple's steps slowed. She felt the air shift. A faint prickling crawled across the back of her neck. Without intending to, her gaze rose toward the Old Vicarage. And there it was, the shadow in the upper window. Miss Marple did not startle easily. Years of sharp observation and the misfortunes of human nature had hardened her nerves. Still, the shape unsettled her. It was too distinct, too deliberate to be dismissed. A person was standing there. And yet, as far as Miss Marple knew, no one should have been inside the Old Vicarage at this hour. She allowed herself a moment to stand still, her eyes never leaving the window. The figure did not move. It did not lean forward or turn away. It simply remained there like a carved silhouette cut into the night. Then, as swiftly as it had appeared, the shape slipped backward and vanished. Miss Marple's brow tightened with concern. She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders and continued toward the front gate of the Old Vicarage, though she did not go inside. Instead, she stood at the boundary wall and studied the house with a calm yet focused mind. People might have looked at her and assumed she was simply an elderly woman who had paused to catch her breath. But the gears inside her thoughts were already turning. After several seconds, she whispered to herself, someone was there. Not an echo of imagination. Not a trick of light. A presence. Miss Marple believed deeply in the way houses held memories. Some soaked up laughter. Some walls kept secrets. Others seemed to trap the faint outlines of sorrow. She had recognized that shadow as something far more recent than a lingering memory. It carried intention. She continued toward her cottage, but she walked at a slower pace, her mind replaying the image again and again. As she reached her garden gate, a familiar voice called to her. "Evening, Miss Marple. Chilly out tonight, isn't it?" It was Thomas Alders, the village postman. He always delivered letters with a quick step and a ready smile, though he was known to chatter more than necessary. Tonight he carried a lantern and wore a coat far too light for the weather. "Good evening, Thomas," she replied warmly. "You're out rather late." "Had a few parcels to drop off at the inn. They were waiting all day, and I thought it best to get them delivered. Wouldn't want any complaints." He was already halfway into a tale about how one parcel contained a broken vase. Miss Marple listened politely but with only half an ear. Her thoughts kept returning to the shadowed window. When Thomas finally paused, she asked, "Tell me, Thomas, is anyone staying in the old vicarage lately? I thought it had been empty since midsummer." Thomas shook his head. "Empty as a pocket with a hole in it. Old house like that takes a lot to upkeep. No one's put down a deposit." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple lifted her gaze toward the dark lane. "I saw someone in the upper window just now." Thomas blinked, startled. "Someone? In the old vicarage?" "Yes," she replied calmly. "A figure. Unmistakably human." Thomas shifted uneasily, gripping his lantern tighter. Could have been a reflection. Or maybe a draft moving the curtains. Or even a stray cat? Folks say cats can look like people in certain lights. Miss Marple gave him a kind but steady look. "Cats do not stand upright, Thomas." He swallowed hard. "Well, no, I suppose they don't." "Has anyone been near the property tonight?" she asked. "No one I noticed." He glanced nervously toward the house. "It's been quiet." "Too quiet, now that you mention it." Miss Marple thanked him and gently ended the conversation. She entered her cottage, lit a lamp, and set her knitting aside. She would not be able to focus on stitches tonight. Instead, she sat at her writing desk and gazed out the window toward the road she had just walked. The old vicarage remained dark. No lantern glow. No movement. No sign that life stirred inside. Yet she knew what she had seen. She spent the next hour considering possibilities. A traveler seeking shelter? A thief? A caretaker? That last thought lingered. The former caretaker, Mr. Colbert, had passed away the previous autumn, leaving the property unmonitored. Since then, a few curious explorers had wandered through the grounds, but none dared enter the building itself. Or at least, none had admitted to doing so. There was also the matter of a rumor she had heard only 2 days ago. Mrs. Pennington from the far end of the village had mentioned, quite casually, that she had seen someone walking near the vicarage late one evening, someone she did not recognize. She had described the figure as thin, rather tall, and moving like a shadow. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She always paid attention to what others overlooked. Then, just after lamplighting time, a knock sounded at her door. 3 sharp taps. Miss Marple rose slowly, smoothed her skirt, and opened the door. Standing on her doorstep was Inspector Lennox, the newly appointed officer overseeing Stone Meadow and the nearby villages. He was a serious man with a calm voice and a habit of taking long pauses before speaking. Behind him, the night stretched wide and silent. "Miss Marple," he greeted, dipping his head politely. "I hope I'm not intruding. Something has come up that you might want to know." "Is it about the Old Vicarage?" she asked at once. Inspector Lennox blinked in surprise. "Yes." "How did you know?" "I saw a shadow in the window not too long ago," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. "It seemed very much alive." The inspector entered, removed his gloves, and settled into a chair near the small hearth. "A report came in less than an hour ago. A passerby walking his dog noticed the back door of the old vicarage standing wide open. He said he didn't see anyone inside, but he didn't go far. Just enough to confirm that the inner hallway had been disturbed. Furniture shifted. A rug moved. That sort of thing." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Then I was correct." "It appears so," Lennox replied. "Which is why I thought it best to speak with you. You have an eye for details that others miss." Miss Marple folded her hands. "What do you intend to do?" "Search the grounds at first light. The building is too dark and too unstable to search safely right now. But I wanted to know exactly what you saw." She described the figure in the window with precise clarity. No exaggeration. No embellishment. A simple, direct account. The inspector listened carefully. When she finished, he said, "So someone was inside before the passerby found the door open. That means whoever it was either left afterward or is still inside. Unless," Miss Marple added softly, "they knew they were seen and chose to hide." Inspector Lennox's jaw tightened. "I don't like that idea." "But it's possible." Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. "There is something else I should tell you. Mrs. Pennington mentioned a stranger in the area recently." "A stranger? When?" "2 nights ago." "And did she describe this person?" Miss Marple repeated the description. Inspector Lennox frowned. "That matches what the passerby told me. He said he thought he saw someone slip behind a hedge when he approached the vicarage." "Then we may be dealing with someone who has been watching the property for a while," Miss Marple said. "Someone who is comfortable moving at night. Someone who knows how to avoid being seen." The inspector stood. "I'll increase patrols tonight. If anyone is hiding in there, we'll find them soon enough." Miss Marple rose as well. "Be cautious, Inspector. Some shadows are not as simple as they appear." He gave her a respectful nod and left. Miss Marple closed the door quietly and returned to her chair. She did not expect to sleep much tonight. And she was correct. Hours later, long past midnight, Miss Marple sat awake, listening. Somewhere beyond the quiet of her cottage, a faint series of sounds reached her, soft, rhythmic thuds. Footsteps. They were distant, but unmistakable. Too steady to be the wind. Too deliberate to be an animal. They were coming from the direction of the Old Vicarage. Miss Marple drew back her curtain, her eyes narrowing as she peered across the yard, past the garden path, and toward the dark silhouette of the old house. She could not see movement at first. The windows remained black. The roofline cut a sharp profile against the faint wash of moonlight. Then a small flash of moving light flickered deep inside the house. Not lantern light. Not candlelight. More like the glint of metal catching a moonbeam. Someone was inside. And whoever it was carried something that reflected the faintest trace of the night sky. Miss Marple watched closely. The light flashed again, once, then twice, moving in short arcs. As if someone inside was searching. She exhaled slowly, hardly making a sound. The shadow she had seen earlier had not been a one-time appearance. It was the beginning. She stepped back from the window, her thoughts clicking sharply into place. Someone was hunting for something in that old house. And the way they moved, silent, focused, and confident, suggested this was not a random wanderer or a curious trespasser. This was someone with purpose. What could be hidden in the old vicarage that would draw a stranger into its haunted silence? Miss Marple had no answer yet. Not tonight. But she knew this, whatever secret lay within that shadowed window had stirred. And once such secrets awaken, they rarely sleep again. She returned to her chair, folded her hands, and waited for dawn. Because at first light, she would go to the old vicarage herself. And Miss Marple never stepped into a mystery lightly, especially one that watched from a window. Chapter 2: The Whisper Behind the Curtain of Dust. Dawn unfolded slowly over Stone Meadow, brushing warm tones across rooftops and washing the village lanes in pale gold. Birds began their morning chorus, their songs carrying easily across the open fields beyond the churchyard. Most villagers woke to the comfort of habit, the clatter of teacups, the rustle of newspapers, the soft tread of feet on familiar floors. Miss Marple, however, had already been awake for hours. Resting sleep had not come to her. She had spent the night listening to the faint sounds drifting from the direction of the old vicarage. At one point, she had heard a sharp clatter, as if something metallic had been dropped on a stone floor. She had risen several times to peer through her curtains. Yet nothing more became visible after the small flash she had seen near midnight. When the first true light touched the village, Miss Marple rose, dressed, and fixed herself a simple breakfast. She ate quietly, her mind turning over the events of the night. She sensed danger, though she did not yet know its form. She sensed secrecy, though she did not yet grasp its reason. And she sensed that someone inside the old vicarage was growing desperate. By the time she stepped onto her front path, Inspector Lennox was already approaching from the road. "Morning, Miss Marple," he called, though his tone held little cheer. "I hoped I'd find you awake." "I rarely sleep much when something unsettles me," she replied. "That makes two of us," the inspector said. His eyes carried faint shadows beneath them, signs of a night spent with little rest. I stationed 2 constables near the vicarage, as we discussed. But neither saw anything. They claimed the house remained dark and still. Miss Marple nodded. I saw light inside at midnight. Light. Lennox repeated sharply. Not from a lantern, she explained. A brief glimmer, like the reflection of metal. Someone was searching inside. The inspector exhaled a long breath. Then the intruder returned after I spoke with you. Or perhaps they never left. She tilted her head slightly. I don't think they left. Lennox straightened. I'm heading to the Old Vicarage now to begin the search. I would appreciate your company, if you're willing. You notice things that others overlook. Miss Marple agreed at once. Together, they walked toward the long, narrow lane flanked by elder trees. The wind carried a faint bite, whispering through the branches. The old vicarage rose ahead like a slumbering relic, its tall shape washed in grey morning light. The front gate creaked as Inspector Lennox pushed it open. Thick ivy clung to the stone walls. The garden beds were long overgrown. The house itself looked as though it had been holding its breath for many years. The inspector studied the back of the property first. This is where the passerby saw the door open. The back door stood shut now. Lennox knelt to examine the frame. Marks here, he murmured. Fresh scratches around the lock. Someone forced it, Miss Marple said, leaning closer. Last night. The inspector nodded grimly. The intruder entered through the back. He opened the door carefully. The hinges groaned, releasing a waft of cold, stale air. Dust hung in the dim hall like suspended threads. The floor was marked with footprints, several sets, each faint but undeniable. Miss Marple stepped inside with deliberate care. She had always believed that houses quietly spoke to anyone patient enough to listen. The old vicarage spoke now in subtle ways, unsettled dust, fragmented patterns in footprints, items moved ever so slightly from where time had left them. The inspector scanned the hallway. I'll check the rooms on the ground floor. You look for anything unusual? Miss Marple gave a small nod and drifted toward the staircase. Each step whispered beneath her feet. The banister felt cold to the touch, as though the house itself recoiled from warmth. She paused halfway up and studied the faint scuff marks running along the edge of the carpet runner. Someone had climbed these stairs in haste. She reached the landing and turned toward the corridor that led to the rooms at the front of the house. The second door on the left was slightly ajar, the door leading to the very room where she had seen the shadow the night before. Miss Marple pushed it open. Morning light spilled faintly across the floor, illuminating the dust in a pale glow. The room was empty, but not untouched. A curtain near the window had been pulled aside, leaving a faint smear on the fabric where a hand had gripped it. A long, narrow box lay open on the floor, its lid thrown aside. Inside the box was nothing but old packing straw. Miss Marple bent slowly and examined the box. The straw looked recently disturbed. Not the kind of disorder that comes from years of neglect, but the kind caused by hands rifling through it. She ran her fingers lightly across the bottom. Something had once been here. something long and thin, perhaps made of metal. Miss Marple called the inspector from the hallway. "Find anything?" "A box," she said softly. "And whatever was inside is gone." Lennox entered and knelt beside the box. "Looks like something was packed here." "Yes," she replied. "And someone came looking for it. But they either found it or arrived too late." Inspector Lennox frowned. "Too late." "Notice the footprint pattern," she said, gesturing to the floor. "Some prints lead toward the box. Others lead away. But look closely. There are places where two sets overlap. One heavier, one lighter. So, two intruders." "Not at the same time," Miss Marple said. "Someone came first. Then someone else came after." Lennox stood abruptly. "We need to check the rest of the house." They searched every room, bedrooms thick with dust, a drawing room with a collapsed beam, a kitchen scattered with broken tiles. Nothing else seemed disturbed. No other footprints as clear as those near the box. Eventually they reached the attic stairs. Lennox hesitated. "You stay here, Miss Marple. The stairs might be unsafe." "I assure you, Inspector, I have climbed far worse," she replied. Still, she respected his caution and remained at the bottom while he ascended. The old boards groaned under his weight. Moments later, he called down. "Nothing. Completely empty." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, though something in her expression shifted. She waited until Lennox came back down the stairs before she spoke. "Inspector, someone came here searching for something they believed was hidden. But someone else may have already found it." "Which raises the question," Lennox said, "what was it? And why was it so important?" He crossed his arms, thinking deeply. The vicarage was empty for months. No one in the village mentioned anything valuable inside. Miss Marple walked slowly back to the window and examined the glass. A faint smudge streaked along the lower corner. She touched it lightly with her fingertip. Someone pressed their hand here to steady themselves. She looked down and noticed a small scrap of folded paper wedged between the wall and the window frame. Carefully, she retrieved it. "Inspector." Lennox joined her. "What have you found?" Miss Marple unfolded the paper. It was brief, only a sentence written in hurried strokes. "He hid it where the last truth fell." Lennox exhaled sharply. "That means nothing to me." "Not yet," Miss Marple said. "But the words carry weight. Someone wrote this quickly. Perhaps as a clue. Or a warning. Do you think the intruder left it?" She shook her head. "The paper is old. The ink faded. This has been here far longer than last night." Lennox frowned. "Then who wrote it?" "Someone who knew the house. Someone who wanted this message found only when someone searched this room." Lennox took the paper, studying it as if it would reveal more. "What does where the last truth fell mean?" Miss Marple looked out the window, her face quiet and thoughtful. "Truth does not merely fall. It collapses only when something drives it down. The inspector stared at her. "Are you suggesting someone died here?" Miss Marple did not answer at once. Her eyes fixed on a faint mark on the wall near the floor, a small dent in the wood. Old, subtle, but in a position that suggested impact. She crouched, touching it gently. "This looks like the corner of a heavy object struck the wall." The inspector knelt beside her. "A struggle?" "Quite possibly." "Was anyone ever reported missing from the vicarage?" Lennox asked. "No," she answered. "But people often hide the most painful truths behind silence." Miss Marple, rising, moved slowly around the room again, piecing together every small detail. Inspector Lennox watched her with growing respect. He had heard stories of her keen observations, but seeing her at work was something else entirely. After several minutes, Miss Marple stopped near the fireplace, the neglected brick hearth coated in years of soot. She knelt again and reached into the dark gap beneath the grate. Something clinked softly against her ring and slid toward her hand. She pulled it out. Inspector Lennox leaned forward, his voice low with disbelief. "Is that a key?" Miss Marple held it up. A small, old-fashioned brass key with a narrow stem and a round bow. Tarnished. Forgotten. Hidden. "Someone dropped this," she said. "Likely during a struggle." "Dropped it, or hid it?" Lennox asked. "Either is possible," she replied. "But the more important question is, what does it unlock?" The inspector took the key, studying it carefully. "This is too small for a door. Maybe a box. Or a compartment." Miss Marple nodded. "And the note suggests it unlocks something connected to a tragic moment." Lennox's expression darkened. "We might be dealing with a crime that took place years ago." Miss Marple looked out the window once again, scanning the garden, the road, and the distant edge of the village. Then she saw movement. A man at the far end of the lane. Thin. Tall. Moving quickly. She recognized the way he carried himself, the slight hunch of someone who wished not to be noticed, the controlled stride of someone accustomed to slipping through shadows. "Inspector," she said quietly. "There." Lennox spun and followed her gaze. But by the time he saw the lane, the man had vanished behind the hedgerow. Lennox cursed under his breath. Miss Marple remained calm. "He was watching the house." "Did you see his face?" Lennox asked. "No," she replied. "But I saw the tension in his posture. He is afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid," she said softly, "that we will discover what he already knows." The inspector marched toward the front door. "I'll send the constables to sweep the woods." "We'll find him." "No," Miss Marple said gently but firmly. "Not yet." Lennox stopped. "Why not?" "Because he will run farther. And fear makes people reckless. We need him to grow confident enough to return." "To return?" Lennox repeated, startled. "Yes," she said simply. "To return. Because the thing he wants is still inside this house, or connected to it." And until he believes he can retrieve it safely, he will remain close. Lennox turned the key in his hand. "And we have this." "And the paper," Miss Marple added. "Two clues. Small, but significant." She glanced at the box again, the empty container filled with straw. What was inside that box was important enough to risk breaking into this house in the dead of night, she said. And someone else came searching after it was already gone. Lennox exhaled slowly. "Which means someone succeeded in taking it. And that person," Miss Marple said quietly, "may not be the intruder who returned last night." The inspector's eyes widened. "A third person?" Miss Marple nodded. "There is more than one secret here." Lennox rubbed his forehead. "This is turning into quite a puzzle." "Most puzzles do not begin with a window shadow unless someone wants to be seen," she said. Lennox froze. "Seen?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "The figure watched me last night." They did not hide behind the curtain. They stood in full view. That was intentional. Why? To send a message. To warn. Or to mislead. Lennox stared at her. "You think someone wanted you to look toward this house?" "Yes," she said. "Because the moment I looked, the game began." Inspector Lennox walked slowly toward the window, gripping the brass key tightly. "Then we're dealing with someone far more deliberate than a simple trespasser." Miss Marple agreed. "Someone who understands human nature well enough to predict reactions. Someone who knew I would not ignore a shadow in a window." She turned toward the hallway. "And someone," she continued, "who believes that whatever truth lies buried in this house is dangerous enough to kill four." The inspector straightened, tension filling the air between them. "You believe a murder took place here?" "I believe," Miss Marple said softly, "that someone died here. And I believe the object in that box holds the reason why." Lennox walked beside her as they made their way back to the front door. "So where do we start?" he asked. Miss Marple paused at the threshold. "We start," she answered, "by learning who lived here last." Lennox nodded slowly. "I'll gather the records." "Old tenants. Visitors. Anyone with ties to the vicarage." "Good," Miss Marple said. "Because once we know who lived here." She held up the paper scrap. "We will understand whose truth fell." The inspector left to summon his officers, and Miss Marple stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. Her gaze drifted once more toward the far end of the lane where the tall man had vanished. She could feel it deep within her. He would return. Because secrets do not sleep. And shadows never appear without reason. Chapter 3: What the Window Saw. The storm that had threatened all afternoon finally broke over the village just past 9 o'clock. Sheets of rain lashed the narrow lanes, and a deep rumble rolled across the roofs as if the night itself were groaning under the weight of secrets too long carried. Inside the old vicarage, the lights flickered once, steadied, and held. Miss Marple stood by the parlor door, her hands lightly clasped, her expression calm in the dim glow. Reverend Holt paced before the hearth, running a hand through his thinning hair with nervous energy. His wife sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, her fingers wrapped around a teacup she had not touched. Inspector Graves stood with his notebook open, though he was not writing. His eyes remained fixed on Miss Marple, who had asked them all to gather here, in this very room, at this very hour. The room was warm, but the air carried the weight of something cold and long hidden. And Miss Marple, without raising her voice, felt the moment had arrived. "I believe," she began, "that the window in the guest bedroom did not lie. What it showed on the night of the attack was no trick of light, no shadow shaped by branches or lanterns. Someone stood there. Someone who had reason to be in that room, reason to hide, reason to watch." She let her words settle. The storm rattled the panes. Reverend Holt swallowed, his throat working. "Miss Marple, we have already discussed this. The shape could have been anything. I do not see why." "No, Reverend," she said gently. "You do see. And that is precisely why someone tried so hard to make sure you never spoke of it again." Silence blanketed the room. Mrs. Holt's fingers tightened around her cup. Inspector Graves straightened slightly. Miss Marple drew in a calm breath. "Let us begin at the start," she said. "The night of the break-in at the church. The night you thought a shadow moved in the vicarage window. That moment was not random. It was the first sign of a scheme set in motion long before the attack on your gardener." Graves frowned. "But what did that shadow have to do with the assault?" "Everything," Miss Marple replied. She crossed to the window, the same height and shape as the one in the upstairs room. The storm lit the outside in brief flashes of white. When she turned back, her eyes were clear, sharp, certain. The shadow in the window belonged to someone who believed they had a right to the vicarage. Someone who thought they were entitled to the church grounds. Someone desperate enough to attack anyone who threatened that claim. Mrs. Holt made a small sound in her throat. "Miss Marple," Graves said carefully, "are you accusing a member of this household?" "No," she replied, "I am accusing a member of the village." The Reverend sagged into a chair. Miss Marple continued, "This began with the land disputes last month. Several acres behind the church were found to have been marked incorrectly on an old map. You told me this yourself when we first spoke." "Yes," he murmured. "I had spoken with the council about it." "The map showed that the land belonged to the vicarage," she said. "But that was not the truth. Someone had tampered with that map. Someone who wanted to claim the land for personal gain. And when you mentioned you would have the records reviewed, someone panicked." Graves's expression turned grim. "Someone tried to steal the map before the review." "Precisely," Miss Marple said. "And someone entered the church late that night to destroy the evidence. They hoped to get the old files from the storage room. They did not expect you to be awake, Reverend. They did not expect you to notice a figure moving near the vicarage window." Reverend Holt's face drained of color. Miss Marple went on. "They crept into your house. Not because they wished to harm you, but because they needed something hidden in the guest room closet." Mrs. Holt gasped softly. "That closet?" "But it contains only old linens." "Old linens," Miss Marple said quietly, and a folded blueprint of the vicarage grounds. A blueprint that had been missing since the renovation 20 years ago. The one that showed the true boundaries of the church property. The one that proved the land still belonged to the parish. Inspector Graves stepped forward.
"Are you saying someone hid the blueprint here?"
"In this house." "No," she said. "I am saying someone hid it here long ago. Someone who once lived in this house. Someone who meant to return for it when the time was right." The room fell silent again. Mrs. Holt whispered, "But who?" "Only the former vicar lived here before us." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes. The former vicar, and his son." Reverend Holt blinked.
"His son?
"But I thought he moved away years before we arrived." "He did," Miss Marple said, "but he did not move far. He works as a contractor. He was seen near the church grounds frequently these past weeks. And when you announced the council meeting, he realized his chance to claim the land was slipping away." "The son," Graves muttered. "Carlton. Carlton Green." "Indeed," Miss Marple said. Mrs. Holt's voice trembled. "Are you certain?" "I am," Miss Marple replied. "The shadow you saw in the window was Carlton searching for the blueprint he hid decades ago." "The gardener who was attacked?" "He heard someone moving around the shed and confronted Carlton, who panicked. Carlton believed the gardener might have seen him. So he struck him and fled. The next day, he tried to destroy the map in the church before it could be sent to the council." Graves closed his notebook. "And the shadowed figure at the window was him returning to retrieve the documents?" "Yes." Reverend Holt pressed his palms to his face, shaken. "All this, over a patch of unused land." "Not unused," Miss Marple said softly. "Valuable. Plans were already drafted to lease it for storage barns. Worth a great deal more than he cared to admit." Graves turned toward the door. "I'll have my men pick him up at once." Miss Marple held up a hand. "He is already here." Every head turned sharply toward her. Miss Marple walked to the hallway door and opened it. There, soaked from the storm, stood Carlton Green. His breath was shallow. His eyes darted to the Reverend, then to Graves, then to Miss Marple, whose calm gaze held him in place. "You knew I would come back," he whispered. "Yes," Miss Marple said. "Because the land never meant as much to you as the blueprint. You needed it to make your claim appear lawful. Without it, you have nothing." Carlton swallowed hard. Rainwater dripped from his coat. "You could have stayed away," Miss Marple said quietly. "You could have started over. But you returned. Because the truth resting behind that window, in that old guest room, pulled you back like a chain." Carlton closed his eyes. "It was never supposed to go this far. I only meant to take what was mine." Graves stepped toward him, but Carlton raised a hand. "No need," he said. "I'll come." He lowered his gaze, defeated, and allowed the inspector to escort him inside. Mrs. Holt wept silently. Reverend Holt sat motionless, shock lining every feature of his face. When Graves guided Carlton out into the rain, the house fell into a hush that felt heavier than the storm. Miss Marple stood by the window once more. A faint flash lit the glass, and for a moment the reflection of the room shimmered on its surface. "What a strange thing a window is," she murmured. "It keeps our secrets inside, and yet sometimes it reveals them with startling clarity." Reverend Holt rose shakily. "Miss Marple, I do not know how to thank you." "There is no need," she said warmly. "Truth merely wishes to be found. I only listen to where it leads." Mrs. Holt approached her, holding her hands tightly. "You saved us." "No," Miss Marple said. "Your conscience saved you. I simply followed its voice." The storm began to soften. The worst of it had passed. Miss Marple stepped out into the night, her umbrella opening with a soft click. The village lay quiet beneath the clearing sky. The old vicarage, with its shadowed window and long-kept secrets, stood still behind her. And as she walked down the lane, the lamps glowed faintly, as though relieved the truth had finally been spoken. If you enjoyed this mystery and want more Miss Marple cases just like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling which case you want next. Your support helps new stories come to life.